Let's look at the book of Hebrews, please. The book of Hebrews, if you want to summarize it, it's at the top of your page, at least I hope it is. I think I put it on there. The more we comprehend the work of Jesus, the more often we should see ourselves coming to God with a genuine heart full of courage, looking for every opportunity to encourage the same in others. The idea of the book of Hebrews is overcoming. And not just overcoming, but overcoming with people. We're bringing this together in unity. And every book in the Bible talks about in the New Testament emphasizes unity. Maybe not exclusively, but they do emphasize unity. And so we need to think about that. So the more we understand and think about, and we all understand what Jesus did, but do we actually comprehend it? That's the question. And I don't know if we'll ever be at a point where we fully comprehend everything that he's done. But the more we comprehend that work, the more we're going to come to God with a full heart, a heart full of courage, and also bringing other people with us. So one of the main points in the book of Hebrews is that the work of Jesus was that he gave us the freedom to approach God, because he's the high priest over the house of God. So as the high priest over the house of God, Jesus has given us this freedom to approach God, or the boldness to approach God. In fact, the word, we'll see it in a minute, is talking about the feeling, the release of, it's freedom of speech, but not in the way we use it in this country. It is having the authority and the ability to speak your mind. And that's something that you can't normally do with God, right? But Jesus has granted us the ability to approach God and say whatever we want to say that's on our hearts. Now, obviously, we can't blaspheme him, but we have boldness to come to him. So that's what we're going to talk about. So the freedom to enter the holiest is what we're talking about. The holiest because of the blood of Jesus. And so we're going to look at several passages related to that. Look at Hebrews chapter 2, verses 5 through 9. For he has not put the world to come of which we speak in subjection to angels, but one testified in a certain place. What is man that you're mindful of him, or the Son of Man that you take care of him? You have made him a little lower than the angels. You have crowned him with glory and honor and set him over the works of your hands. You have put all things in subjection under his feet. For in that he put all in subjection under him, he left nothing that is not put under him. But we do not yet see all things put under him. But we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels for the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, might taste death for everyone. So here his point is, the last verse there. Jesus came so that he can taste death for everyone. That's part of his function as a high priest. Not only is he the priest, but he's also the sacrifice that the priest made. There's a lot here. We're going to go through the passage when we get to it, but that's one of the things. It says here that he was brought lower than the angels for the death. We also see that he was, in verses 14 and 15, inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood, he himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who had the power of death, that is the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. So he is the one who shared, he shared in our flesh and blood, right? And the book of Hebrews talks about why that was so important. You remember what the reason was that it was so important that he shared with us flesh and blood? How does that relate to his priesthood? Physical descendant? Not really, no. He didn't have any descendants. Are you saying he's descended from it? Is that what you mean? Yeah. Oh, his descendancy. Oh, I got you. Yeah, okay, so he had to, in order to fulfill prophecy of the Son of David. How does this physical condition, flesh and blood, help him relate to us? What does it do for him? He experienced what we experience. He understands our weaknesses. He understands the temptations that we're facing. He is able to be a merciful and faithful high priest. So that's part of the process that is part of this. Yes. I think it's for us. Yeah. I don't, there are a lot of questions with that I don't know how to answer, though, to be honest, because Jesus did a lot of things that God's not supposed to be able to do, like be born and things like that, you know? So, but I think it's for us. I don't think he had to learn it. But he did learn some things as a human growing up. Pretty amazing concept. All right, so we also have the one who brought the promise of eternal rest, chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. This is part of the freedom that Jesus gives us. Part of that freedom comes because it says, there remains therefore a rest for the people of God, for he who entered his rest has himself also ceased from his works as God did from his. So now we can have entry into the rest that God promised. And he goes into great detail about what that rest is. And it's not the Sabbath. It's not the conquering of Canaan. It's heaven. And in a sense, what we have here, but it's looking at the prospect of what we have to look forward to, the eternal rest. Then look at chapter 9, 13 and 14. If the blood of bulls and goats and ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. So he is the one who brought us, made the perfect sacrifice of himself. And this is how we are allowed to enter into the holiest of holies. All these things working together. In chapter 10, in verse 19, incidentally, 19 through 25 is the hub of where this is all coming from. This, is, in my estimation, is the central idea of the entire book. We have boldness in verse 19. Therefore, brethren, having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus. And let me see my footnote. My footnote says confidence instead of boldness. Anybody have a different word? Liberty. This is the one where the word literally means the freedom to speak. And that's the idea. But he's not saying we have freedom to speak to enter the holiest. But the idea here is that if you have freedom to speak your mind, what does that imply about the relationship that you have with that person? Trust, openness, that there's a caring there, that he cares who we are and what we think, right? He's willing to listen to us. Now, we're not going to inform him anything, but he will listen and he'll hear us. That's the important part of this. And this freedom to speak out it's translated as courage, or mine one says boldness. That's the idea. And it's a bold thing to enter into the presence of God. And incidentally, when we're talking about entering the holiest by the blood of Jesus, especially in the book of Hebrews, we're often talking about the idea of prayer. It's at least included in it, which is the idea. I mean, it's part of the concept here. So he consecrated a new and living way to enter that holiest of holies through his body. There's a lot going on there. Look in chapter 10, verses 5 through 10. He sanctified us through the death of his body. So therefore, when he came into the world, he said, sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin you had no pleasure. Then I said, behold, I've come. In the volume of the book it is written of me to do your will, O God. Previously saying, sacrifice and offering, burnt offerings and offerings for sin you did not desire, nor had pleasure in them, which are offered according to the law. Then he said, behold, I've come to do your will, O God. He takes away the first, that he may establish the second. By that will, we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. So he came to give his all, and that included his body and death, so that we can be saved from our sins. And because of that, he is the one who mediated a better covenant based on better promises. That's chapter 8 and verse 6. But now he has obtained a more excellent ministry, inasmuch as he is also a mediator of a better covenant, which was established on better promises. So what we have now in every way is better, right? We all recognize that. And he's emphasizing the idea here that we need to appreciate what we have. Now, we didn't grow up following the law of Moses, and a lot of these people did. In fact, it's called Hebrews for a reason, right? He's talking to Hebrew people. These are Christians who came out of Judaism and evidently were being persecuted and being tempted to go back, and so he's giving an argument here. Why would you go back to what's inferior? You have what's better here, and why would you don't want to give that up. And the law could never offer what Jesus offered. And then we have a new and living way that comes through the veil, which is his flesh, chapter 10 and verse 20. He says, by a new and living way which he consecrated for us through the veil, which is his flesh. So that ties in with verses 19 and 20. We have boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way through the veil. That is his flesh. So whenever... this is all symbolic, of course. What happened when Jesus died on the cross? What happened to the veil in the temple? Torn two, from top to bottom. How thick was that thing? You remember?
Very thick.
Yeah, it was at least a hand's breadth, and it may have been bigger. I may be remembering it wrong, but it was big. I know that thing had to be heavy, and it was hung up, and there's no way. And it didn't tear from the bottom up; it tore from the top down. So that's symbolic, and that is mentioned here. It's not the tearing of isn't mentioned, obviously, but we can enter into that holy place. And what is the symbolism of the tearing of the veil? What does it mean? We now have access. Yeah. So when Jesus died, the veil was torn. Now we have access to the holiest of holies, which is where? What? Symbolically, it's what place? What? No. That's how we go. What is the holiest of holies symbolically? Heaven?
Well, I think it represents heaven.
Heaven. I think so. It's God, God's presence, and his throne room, right? And that's how it's depicted. Remember what was in the holiest of holies? We had the angels that were facing each other, or the wings that were touching each other in the middle. What other things? Ark of the Covenant. And what was on the top? Mercy seat. You know, that was called the throne of God, right? So we approach God. They approach God. How often could they do that? Once a year with sacrifices. It's rumored, I've never seen this verified, it's not a biblical thing, but it's rumored that they would tie a rope to their foot when they went in case God struck them dead, and they could pull them out. Because it happened, right? Well, the holiest of holies is where God is. They would come and make a sacrifice, and this was to cleanse the entire people, all the people. And he could only go in there once a year after he made sacrifices for himself. The priest could only go into the temple. No one else could go into the temple, right, to do the sacrifices. But now all that's been taken away. And we have, as Gentiles, and ladies, as women, we have access to the same God in the same place that was restricted from everyone else for thousands of years. Think about 1,000 years. Think about this for a second. How many people actually saw the inside of the holiest of holies? I mean, you could probably count them, couldn't you? If we just thought about it, we could at least divide it up by how many years, right? And we would say not that many. How many people actually saw into the ark? We know 500 people or so that died looking into it, but we didn't say that they actually saw anything. I don't remember. How many people saw inside the temple? So here, this is what strikes me. How elaborate was the decoration in the temple? Extremely. For a couple of people to see. And kings don't usually act that way, do they? They're going to show off the royalty and all that stuff. But it wasn't for God, but it was to show the holiness of God. And there's a lot that's going on there. Now we have access. And if it wasn't for Jesus, we would still be trying to figure out how we can make it. Not very good. All right, so we have a new and better promises, created a new and living way through the veil. He is our perfect high priest. He was not of the order of the Levites, but he is the eternal order, signified by Melchizedek. That's in chapter 7, 20 and 22, and chapter 8, verses 1 through 6. That is the story of Melchizedek is meant, we'll talk about it when we get there. And the way I see it, it's not meant to say that Melchizedek was eternal. It's meant to say that Melchizedek, from the standpoint of the law, had no authority. He had no beginning and end. He had no lineage that would allow him to be one who sacrificed. Now, of course, he was before the law ever existed, but that's kind of the point. And Paul makes the point in Galatians as well. But when we're thinking about the order of Melchizedek, we don't know when it began, anything about it, except for the fact that we just see this guy. He shows up, and he's a prophet of God, and he's a legitimate prophet of God, and he takes a tenth from Abraham, right? Which is pretty amazing. Yeah.
You know, there's something we talked about this before. Jewish tradition, and again, I don't know that it's written in the Jewish tradition of Melchizedek was Shem.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you go back to Genesis, look at the genealogy and longevity, Abraham and Shem were contemporaries for about 75 years.
Yeah, it could have easily been him. In my opinion, Hebrews would have said it was Shem, but that doesn't mean it wasn't, right? Because that's my opinion. But they definitely had overlap, and that's pretty amazing when you think about it. How long it had been since the flood, and they're still walking around. Pretty amazing. Okay, so he was not of the order of the Levites, but of an eternal order, Melchizedek, and that's the same order that Jesus is from. That's the point. And the great thing about that, and Paul makes this point clearly in the book of Galatians, is that he was not allowed to be a priest under the old law. He couldn't be a priest. He had to be a priest of a different law. That's the law of the eternal principle here with Melchizedek. And so the salvation that Jesus offers has nothing to do with the law of Moses. It's completely separate from it. And, you know, we've had some interesting discussions at the creamery over this one, but it's pretty hard to get around this. We've actually changed some minds up there that they come in adamantly, yeah, we follow the old law. And then we go through the book of Galatians, I heard him last night, we don't follow the old law. Well, we follow some of them, but he knew better. So anyway, it's pretty obvious when you actually open your mind and start looking what it's talking about. We don't follow the old law anymore. Anyway, his point is that we don't want to go back to the old law because now we have something that's so much better. And he provided the opportunity and gave us the right to approach God. So based on these things, he gives three phrases back in Hebrews chapter 10. He gives three phrases that tell us what should be the result of all this information that we've just distilled. First one is verse 22. The first phrase is that we draw near to God with true hearts and full assurance of faith. The second one is verse 23. We unwaveringly hold fast the confession of our hope. And the third one is we consider one another in order to stir up love and good works. Those are the three things. Now, when you're looking at three subjunctive phrases, these phrases, I don't want to get too technical, but these phrases, when you see them written in this way, they're all of equal importance. You know, when we have conversation and you're reading a book, we all know that some information is more important than other information. It may all be true, it may all be important, but some is more important than others. But when you have a list like this, and it's categorized like this, we're seeing things that are of equal standing, and one is not more important than the other. So we have three things that should be results of the sacrifice of Jesus. We draw near to God, we hold fast what we've been taught, and those are two different things, and we consider one another. Those are the three things that we should do. And a lot of times we are content with number one. I'm going to draw near to God with a full assurance of faith. And everything else is okay. I don't worry about that. Yes?
It seems to me there's a parallel here. In verse 22, you got the assurance of faith. In 23, we unswervingly profess hope.
Mm-hmm.
In 24, there's a suggestion of love. Faith, hope, and love.
Exactly.
That's,
It's a good observation. Yeah, good observation. And that's completely fitting for what we have in the new covenant. And that really is Paul's point in 1 Corinthians 13, right? When he's talking about miracles. Right. Those things are going to go away. The only thing that's going to remain is faith, hope, and love. And even faith and hope will go away eventually, and love is going to be the only thing that lasts. Yeah. Very good. Thank you. So these are things that we need to talk about. Well, let's look at how should these things affect us as Christians. First of all, we need to see ourselves continuously coming to God with a genuine heart of courage, full of courage. And this is something I think we need to. We all know this, I know, but we ought to emphasize it. We don't come to God once. You know, we come to Him when we're baptized. And we stay there. I wish that were the case. But we must continue to come to God because our hearts have to continue to seek Him. And I'm not saying that we fall away and have to come back, but our focus gets drained, doesn't it? We start looking at other things, and we got to fix things in life, and we need to continuously bring our hearts back to Him. And we do that in various ways, but this is what he says in verse 22. Let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith. Okay, think about this for a second. What does it mean to have a true heart? Does your translation say something that helps explain that? Sincere. All right, what does sincere mean? Without hypocrisy, yeah. It's not perfection, but with all of our hearts, we're not doing it for ulterior motives. We're doing it to be with God. We're seeking Him from a pure heart, right? And that's challenging. Let me tell you, it's challenging. It may not be for y'all. It is for me because my motives are all over the place. And it's rare that I do anything for one reason. I've always got a lot of reasons to do stuff. And I think as humans we do that. But my goal is to make sure that I'm doing it with the best of motives. And sometimes I don't because I don't realize what I'm doing, right? We don't always do the right thing in the right way for the right reasons. But here we do what we do. We keep drawing close to Him, draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith. What does that tell you of assurance of faith? I thought faith was not something that you could have assurance of. Is it true that you can't have assurance if it's faith?
We should have it.
We should, yeah. Faith is not what the world faith in the world is just having a belief. It's not really being sure, it's just deciding to be sure, right? But the Bible teaches over and over we can be positive. We can be assured, right, of the faith. So that is important because it tells us if we're going to draw near to God, the only way we're going to do that is if we have the confidence to do it. That we can. Have you ever been in a position where you wanted to approach God, but you weren't sure if He would accept you? Man, I have. It's terrible. It doesn't feel very good. And then you start worrying, well, what am I going to do now? I don't know He's ever going to hear me. and I don't know if my prayers are going to get beyond the ceiling. That's not a good place, because it's really hard for you to come to God if you don't think He's going to accept you. Hey, here's some insight. The people out there, they feel the same way. They're too bad. Why would God want them? And all they're going to do is come around people that's going to judge them and tell them how bad they are again. So I'm not saying we do that. I'm saying that's how they see it. So anyway, the idea going through here, drawing with a pure heart, full assurance of faith, having a heart sprinkled from an evil conscience. All right, what does the idea of sprinkling relate to?
The sprinkling of from the half
By the priests. Yeah, that's right. The sprinkling comes, and that's how things are purified. All right, so our hearts are sprinkled, our conscience is sprinkled. That means we can have a conscience purified. That's not an easy process, but it is there. It can happen. And then our bodies washed with pure water. This is probably talking about referencing cleansing in the same context, which they did have some cleansing like that, but it's really easy to jump to the idea of New Testament baptism, right? We're going to be baptized, and our bodies are going to be washed with pure water. That doesn't mean that we have to have 100% pristine water, but it's talking about the motives, I think, is what he's talking about, being pure. Okay, so we're drawing near, holding fast in verse 23, hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering. What is here at the end of this verse, he gives us a clue on how it is that we can continue to hold fast our faith without wavering. Because, why? He who promised is faithful. So we need to recognize that when we start wavering, it's because we've stopped trusting in the one who doesn't waver. And that's not an attack or an insult. It's human nature. We start worrying about the things ourselves, and we forget that there's somebody who's in control, who sees everything, and in His own timing, everything's going to work out, right? But we get so caught up and worried, and then we start losing grip on Christianity because we feel like we've got to perfect everything inside. And we're working toward it, but we're never going to get there. And then he says, let us stir up one another. Let us consider one another. What is the purpose of the consideration here? To do what? Stir up. That word is a word that can be also contention, but is in a positive sense, right? We're stirring people up. What does that mean in a practical sense? We're stirring up love and good works. What does that mean?
I like the way that NIV that. It says, let us consider how we may spur one another on.
Spur one another on. All right, I like that. We're spurring them on in love and good deeds. What else? How does that work, though? How do I spur you on? How do you spur me on? Encouragement, man, that's a big one. I'm a little bit, Carla would agree with this, I'm a little bit sometimes not very insightful, not very aware. In fact, she told me the other day, you're 51 years old, you're still not aware yet. Nah. So I admit this is a weakness of mine. And I'm learning, in the last few years, I've learned this one lesson. People need encouragement more than anything else. I'm convinced of it. They need encouragement more than anything else. They need it more than our correction. They need it more than our love. And of course, I know that is love, but they need encouragement because the world's beating them down, and I'm trying to figure out how to get better at it. Yeah.
Yeah, what I've always heard, it takes 10 attaboys to offset one kick in the pants.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. 10 attaboys to offset one kick in the pants. Yeah. And I'm good at kicking in the pants sometimes, but I need to learn how to do the attaboys, and so that's what I'm trying to do. Anyway, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to consider how we can, and we're not considering how we can stir up love and good works. I mean, that's part of it, but what are we supposed to consider here? One another, right? That that is, I'm putting your needs above mine, and I'm trying to think, okay, what can I do to help in their life? And it's hard because there's only so much we can do, and there's only so many hours in a day, that kind of thing. Yeah, Paul? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Everything stays within our doors, in our house.
Maybe a word for it, agape.
Agape. Yeah, that's right. Agape love. Our culture has taught us to be that way, and as Christians, I believe we ought to be fighting against that. We ought to be trying our best. And how do you do that? You know, the only way that you can build a relationship like that is time together. It's the only way it can happen. It can't happen any other way. Now, time together does not mean that you're going to do it, right? You might be fighting tooth and nail the whole time, but time together is where you start. So that's just something to consider. And I know y'all do a great job of that. Thank you very much.